He had been abandoned on the highway with a suitcase and a note, and it was a spot he refused to leave. The Los Angeles sun was a glaring force, beating down on the pavement as if attempting to purify the city with fire. I was traveling south, just beyond Fairfax, when I noticed the suitcase, old, brown, and tattered, discarded like so many other things people no longer wish to confront. Then, I caught a flicker of movement. A tiny form was huddled against it, motionless aside from the gentle rise and fall of its small chest, with something white bound around its head. I swerved to the shoulder so quickly I almost grazed the curb, then leaped out and rushed toward it. The creature was a German Shepherd puppy, likely no older than 4 months. Its body was pressed against the suitcase as if they were one. His eyes, however, were obscured. Someone had fastened a strip of white fabric around his head, completely blocking his vision. He was unaware of his location. He had no idea that cars were speeding by just inches away. And yet, he remained still. I stood frozen, not from indecision, but from the sheer disbelief of the scene before me. His breathing was shallow, his paws scraped raw. His nose twitched toward my boots, but that was his only reaction. He simply stayed, silent, either guarding the suitcase or waiting for someone who would not return. Duct taped to the suitcase's top was a note, scrawled in bold black marker, "Free dog." Too loud. A knot formed in my throat. I crouched down slowly, my heart pounding. "Hey," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Hey, buddy." The puppy flinched but then cocked his head, straining to listen. Though he couldn't see me, he was still attentive. I reached out, my fingers brushing the edge of the blindfold. It was an old white t-shirt, tied so tightly it had created marks behind his ears. Who could do such a thing to a puppy? He offered no resistance, not a whine, just quick, shallow breaths. I gently slid the cloth from his eyes. He blinked against the sunlight, squinting as if it were painful. His eyes were a deep brown, glazed and unfocused. But then he glanced at me for a fleeting moment before laying his head back down on the suitcase. It contained nothing else, just a ripped blanket, some crumpled paper, and a cracked, empty plastic bowl. He had not strayed from that spot. He was waiting. "My name is Michael. I'm a volunteer these days, but I once drove this very road for a living. I have witnessed all manner of things abandoned on California streets, but never had I seen something wait so patiently for its own heartbreak." I sat on the ground beside him, letting the sun beat down on my back and the cars rush past. He did not look away from the shimmering heat on the road. I have no idea how long he had been there, but a question burned in my mind. Would he come with me, or was he destined to perish next to the suitcase they had left him with? He remained motionless when I lifted the suitcase. It was the only way he would follow. I had tried calling to him, speaking soft words of encouragement, and even placing a water bottle nearby. But the second I moved away without the suitcase, he curled more tightly around it, as if it were the last meaningful object on Earth. So, I took hold of the handle, cracked and sticky from tape, and hoisted the case onto my shoulder. Only then did he rise. He was unsteady at first. His hind legs shook, and one paw seemed to drag slightly, but he stood and followed me. There was no sound, no bark, not a moment of hesitation. The blindfold I had removed from his eyes was still in my pocket, knotted and dirty. I couldn't discard it just yet. It felt like a piece of his story, something I needed to hold on to until he no longer required me to. I guided him to my van and opened the side door. He stared at the step as if it were a mountain. Then he leaped, landing awkwardly and nearly tumbling over. But he managed to stay on his feet, climb inside, and settle down next to the suitcase, resting his head against it once more. That's when the scars became truly visible. Small ones dotted his muzzle. Barely healed scratches marked his ears, and patches of fur were thin. Not from mange, but from prolonged pressure. Pressure against something unyielding, perhaps the interior of that very suitcase. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, gazing at the traffic, uncertain of my next move. A dog like this would not fare well in the city pound. And I wasn't prepared for another dog, not after Max. Yet something about him, that German Shepherd puppy with no name, no voice, and no tears, communicated that he didn't need a forever home. He needed someone to believe he was worth saving. I drove him to a small rescue shelter where I used to volunteer before my life unraveled. They had spaced the last I knew. Perhaps they still did. When I opened the van door, he refused to move until I picked up the suitcase again. Only then did he follow me inside, one paw dragging, eyes half-lidded, but his spirit still holding on. Does he have a name? The intake coordinator asked, kneeling to meet his gaze. I shook my head. He does now, she whispered. Welcome home, Toby. He blinked, and for the first time, his tail gave a single, faint wag. They had left him blind and silent on a scorching roadside. And yet, he waited. Toby did not cry or protest. He just clung to that suitcase as if it were a memory that could offer him protection. The more I observed him, the more something twisted inside me. Because someone had done this. Someone had looked into this German Shepherd puppy's eyes and made a conscious decision to tie a blindfold over his face, to discard him like refuse on hot asphalt, and to pen a cruel joke of a note like, "Free dog." Too loud. As if he were defective. As if he deserved it. As if his life was worthless. I am not a violent person. I never have been. But in that moment, I wanted to scream at the sky. How many more like him are out there? Abandoned when they become an inconvenience. Too noisy, too large, too full of life. Toby was now panting in the shelter room. Not whining, not barking, just panting. That hollow, vacant breathing that occurs when a dog is unsure of what it is permitted to feel. The staff performed a quick assessment and confirmed he had no microchip, no records, and no one was searching for him. Of course not. They had abandoned him with a suitcase and a blindfold. They intended for him to be forgotten. A veterinarian brought a bowl of soft food. Toby wouldn't touch it. He just sniffed the air, then turned his head toward the sound. He hadn't eaten in who knows how long, yet he still couldn't bring himself to trust it. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the suitcase beside me, and whispered, "It's okay now." He didn't look at me, but he lay down with his back resting against my leg, and something cracked open within me. The empty space that had sealed shut after Max, my own German Shepherd and my shadow for 10 years, had died. The space I had vowed no dog would ever occupy again. It ached. It burned. But it was open. Some people don't deserve dogs, I muttered. But you didn't deserve this. Toby shifted. Then slowly, as if the movement was painful, he extended a paw and touched the suitcase. Not the food. Not me. The suitcase. As if a part of him still believed it held some meaning. I couldn't allow that to be the only thing he trusted in this world. Not after what they did. Not after leaving him blind, silent, and alone in the middle of Los Angeles. He had to know. Not everyone walks away. Some of us stay. He remained curled up against that suitcase for hours. Even when the staff provided a soft bed and a quiet corner in the intake room. They dimmed the lights. They offered him a blanket with a lavender scent, but he did not stir. He just pressed his body against that tattered brown case as if it still contained something he had to protect. And I found I couldn't leave either. I sat there on the cold tile floor, watching this German Shepherd puppy breathe, observing the rise and fall of his chest, so slow it was frightening. I had witnessed trauma before. I'd seen dogs that flinched at loud sounds, recoiled from touch, or whimpered in their sleep. But this was different. Toby wasn't hiding. He wasn't reacting. He was simply absent, as if someone had extinguished the light within him, leaving only the shell. I asked the staff if he could remain there overnight. They agreed with some uncertainty. Puppies usually cry when left alone. Not him. That night, I didn't return home. I circled the block 5 times before coming back. I had an old blanket in the van, one that Max used to love. It smelled of cedar and thyme. I brought it inside and set it near the suitcase. Toby showed no reaction, but when I sat down beside it, leaned my back against the wall, and exhaled a long breath, I noticed something. His tail twitched just once, the barest of flickers. It was nothing. It was everything. I whispered to him. I can't even recall what I said. Something about the road, about how some people destroy what they fail to understand, about how some dogs, despite everything, still try to love the world. He didn't move, but he was listening. The following morning, he received a full examination. He had bruises on his ribs, faint ones, probably from being confined. His paw pads were raw from the heat. And then the vet said something that sent a chill through me. His vision is fine, but he's not blinking like a normal puppy. It's as if he's trained himself not to look. He had learned not to look. Who teaches a puppy that? I stepped outside afterward and sat on the curb, my hands clenched into fists. There is a quiet rage that builds when you witness something innocent damaged so completely and deliberately. Not by nature or accident, but by choice. Someone chose this. And Toby, he chose to survive regardless. He deserved more than a cot in a corner in a file without a name. He deserved someone who would stay. And whether I was prepared for it or not, I was already his. He refused food the first night, and the second as well. But on the third morning, I entered the shelter just after sunrise to find that something had shifted. The blanket I had left, Max's old cedar-scented one, was now pulled halfway across the room. And Toby, the German Shepherd puppy who wouldn't move or make a sound or even blink, was lying on it. Not on the cold tiles, not in the corner, but on the blanket. His eyes met mine for a brief second. He didn't flinch. That was the first crack in the wall. I sat down next to him, the suitcase in my lap, and began to unwrap a small rubber toy I had found in Max's old box the night before. It was a chewed-up yellow duck, its squeaker long dead, but it still faintly smelled of something warm. I placed it near him. He sniffed it. He didn't move, but his nose twitched. His paw shifted slightly toward it. "Toby," I whispered, "you can take it. It's yours now." He didn't. But an hour later, when I stepped out and returned, it was held between his paws like a precious secret. That same day, a family came into the shelter. They were young parents with tired eyes, and their little girl clutched a pink notebook to her chest. She was perhaps 7, with her hair in loose braids and pale cheeks, and she was silent. Emma, a member of the shelter staff, quietly explained that the girl hadn't spoken a word in 11 months, a result of trauma from a car accident and anxiety so debilitating that even school had become impossible. They were considering adoption, not with any urgency, but just to see if the right dog might connect with her. I said nothing, but Toby raised his head when she walked by. Not quickly or with alertness, just a small, slow lift. His eyes locked with hers. The girl, Emma, stopped and stared back. Neither of them moved. There was no barking, no jumping, no wagging tail. Just two quiet souls who had both been silenced by people who should have been their protectors. And then, for the first time since I had found him, Toby did something that left me breathless. He stood, walked over to her, not to her parents, and rested his head gently on her thigh. She didn't pull away. She dropped her notebook, sat down on the floor, and placed both hands on his face. He didn't blink or tremble. He leaned into her palms as if they were the first safe place he had ever known, and I couldn't breathe. The shelter staff looked at me. One of them whispered, "I think he chose." But in that instant, I knew they had both chosen each other. The question was, could they learn to heal together? The next day, she returned. At the same time, clutching the same little pink notebook tightly to her chest. Emma didn't speak, smile, or even look at the other dogs. She walked directly through the door, scanned the room, and paused when she saw him. Toby was curled in his usual corner, his head on the suitcase, the duck toy between his paws. But when he saw her, he got up, without hesitation. His tail didn't wag. Not yet. But he approached her with a quiet sense of purpose, as if responding to a question only they could hear. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor before he even reached her. She set down her notebook and opened it. On every page were drawings of dogs, roads, suitcases, and a little girl holding hands with a brown dog. I watched from a distance as Toby gently touched his nose to one of the pages. She turned it, showing him the next, and then the next. He never looked away. It was the longest he had been separated from that suitcase since I brought him in. And I realized something that made my chest ache. He wasn't choosing the suitcase anymore. He was choosing her. I met with the shelter director that afternoon. They explained that Emma's therapist thought exposure to dogs might facilitate an emotional release. Emma had stopped speaking after the accident that claimed her older brother's life, and no therapy had been able to break through her silence. Until now, until this quiet German Shepherd puppy who had once forgotten how to see. "He hears her," I said softly. The director nodded. "And she hears him." That night, Emma's family inquired about fostering Toby for a weekend, to see if their connection would endure outside the shelter's walls. I agreed. I packed the suitcase, the blanket, and the duck toy. As we walked to their car, Toby glanced back at me just once, and I didn't see fear in his eyes. I saw something approaching trust. Perhaps it was too soon. Perhaps he wasn't ready, and maybe she wasn't either. But as the car door closed and he climbed in beside her, something told me they had already begun saving one another. The only question remaining was, would the world permit it to last? The update arrived the very next morning as a short text from the shelter manager. "You need to come in." Something happened. My heart plummeted. I raced over, bracing myself for bad news. Perhaps Toby had panicked or shut down again. Maybe it had all been too overwhelming. But when I got there, they were waiting for me outside on the grass. Emma, her mom, her dad, and Toby. And Emma was laughing. Not just smiling. She was laughing with full, soft bursts of joy, as if something was breaking free inside her. Toby sat before her, licking her fingers, his duck toy resting in her lap. His ears were pricked forward, his eyes brighter than I had ever seen them. Emma's mom rose and gave me a tight hug. She spoke, she whispered. She said his name, just looked at him, and said, Toby, clear as anything. No hesitation. I looked down at him, this German Shepherd puppy who had once lain blindfolded beside a suitcase on a highway, now lifting a broken little girl back into the world. I had to turn away as my own eyes began to burn. They told me more. The night Toby came home with them, he refused to sleep anywhere but next to her bed. He lay on the rug, his head on her slippers, just watching her. And in the darkness, she had whispered it, Toby. Her first word in almost a year. I knelt beside him and ran a hand along his back. You really are something else, huh? He leaned into my touch, and his tail wagged just once, a steady, confident motion. Emma opened her notebook and handed it to me. On the first page was a new drawing, her holding Toby's leash, standing in the sunlight. In the sky above them, she had written one word in big block letters, safe. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, my throat tight. That day, the director began the paperwork. Emma's family wasn't just fostering anymore. They were adopting him. I wasn't losing Toby. I was watching him become who he was always meant to be. But I couldn't help but wonder, after all the pain he had endured, could he ever truly believe this was forever? The first night Toby was in his new home, he didn't sleep. Emma's parents recounted how he paced between rooms, checking doors, sniffing corners, and circling back to her bedside, as if to make sure she hadn't vanished. He never barked or cried, just watched, his silence a form of guardianship over what he had finally been given. By the second night, he had curled up at the foot of Emma's bed. By the third, his head was resting on her lap as she read aloud, slowly and sometimes stumbling, but reading nonetheless. Toby didn't comprehend the stories, but he listened, his eyes soft, ears forward, his tail sweeping the floor in lazy arcs, as though each syllable pulled him further from the roadside, the blindfold, and the suitcase. The vet examined him again that week. He had gained weight, his cuts had healed, and there was no infection. But the most significant change wasn't medical, it was behavioral. He's learning to look people in the eye again, she remarked. You don't fake that. The shelter staff invited me for a visit a few days later. I wasn't sure what to expect, but the moment I entered their backyard, Toby sprinted toward me at full speed, tail wagging, ears pricked as if he had been anticipating my arrival. He didn't stop at my feet but launched his front paws into my lap and licked my chin, then darted back to Emma as if to say, Don't worry, I'll be right back. She laughed and nodded as if she understood. Then she approached me, holding something in both hands. It was the suitcase, taped, scuffed, but now adorned with hand-drawn stickers of stars, hearts, and paw prints. On the side, she had written a single word in pink paint, home. My knees almost buckled. I knelt, pressing a hand to the warm, faded canvas. He sleeps next to it, she whispered. It was her second sentence to me. Just 4 words, but they hit harder than any speech. He didn't sleep beside it because he was reliving the pain. He slept there because it was a reminder that someone had come back for him. Because now it no longer symbolized abandonment. It symbolized rescue. Toby didn't need the suitcase anymore. He had claimed it not as a wound, but as a reminder that the dog they left behind was no longer alone. Not ever again. It was a Saturday when I saw them next. Emma and Toby were walking together in the park near my old delivery route. No leash, no fear, just 2 shadows moving side by side in the golden morning light. Toby was transformed. The way he carried himself, ears up, steps light, eyes alert, was a world away from the broken German Shepherd puppy I had found pressed against that suitcase weeks ago. He no longer looked over his shoulder. He didn't freeze when cars drove by. He no longer slept with his back to a wall. He was simply living. Emma noticed me first and waved. Toby trotted over as if he knew I'd be there. He pressed his head into my chest, his tail swaying, his breath even and calm. Then he turned and ran back to her, circling her feet until she laughed. I sat on a nearby bench as her parents joined me. Emma sat on the grass, pulled out her notebook, and started to draw. Toby lay down beside her, resting his chin on her knee. Her dad turned to me and said, "He's with her every minute. School, therapy, grocery runs. He even waits by the bathroom door. Won't let her out of his sight. He knows what it's like to be left behind," I replied, "and he's never going to let it happen to her." Later that day, they invited me to their home. Toby guided me through the house as if it were his duty, room by room, tail wagging, checking to ensure I was following. In a corner by the window sat the old suitcase, now lined with a plush bed and a pillow. Toby didn't sleep in it anymore, but he still touched it with his nose each morning. I noticed something new on the wall, a framed photograph of Emma and Toby curled up together, eyes closed, forehead to fur. Beneath it, in Emma's handwriting, were the words, "We were both waiting, but now we're home." I had to step outside for a moment to catch my breath because grief has strange timing. It doesn't give a warning before it appears. And sometimes it intertwines with joy so tightly you can't tell if you're crying from pain or from gratitude. Max, my old shepherd, would have loved Toby. He possessed that same inner fire, that same gentleness hidden behind silent eyes. I looked back through the window and saw Emma reading aloud, her voice clear and steady. Toby was perfectly still. He just listened, because now he had everything he had once waited for. Not in the suitcase, not by the road, but in her voice. It happened on a Thursday, just after dusk. A thunderstorm rolled in quickly over the hills behind their neighborhood. The wind howled, and the sky cracked open with distant rumbles. Emma's mom later told me she had only stepped into the kitchen for 5 minutes. When she returned, the door was ajar, and Toby was gone. There was no barking, no scratching. He was simply gone. The storm hit with full force. Rain lashed the streets, trees swayed violently, and the sky flashed with bursts of white light. I received the call while loading crates behind a shelter. Emma's voice, trembling and barely a whisper, came through the line, "He's not here." I dropped everything and ran to my truck. By the time I arrived in their neighborhood, people were already out in raincoats with flashlights, searching driveways and backyards. The shelter staff had posted on every local social media group. The police were aware. Everyone knew, because this wasn't just a lost dog. This was Toby, the puppy who had waited in silence, the one who had found the one person he could trust. And now he was out there again, in the dark and the rain, perhaps believing he had been abandoned once more. I walked for hours, calling his name, whistling, checking under cars, behind dumpsters, and beneath porches. The streets offered no clues until I saw it. Near the edge of the neighborhood, where the houses grew sparse and the sound of the freeway returned, was an old, abandoned concrete lot. In the far corner, beside a pile of broken wood and refuse, a small, dark shape was curled under a bent signpost. I knew it was him before I was even close. Toby, soaked through and covered in mud, lying next to something, a suitcase. Not his, just another old, discarded bag someone had thrown on the side of the road. But Toby had found it and laid beside it, as if the past had reclaimed him, as if a part of him still believed this was where he belonged. I fell to my knees beside him. "Toby," I whispered, choking on the sound of my own voice. "No, buddy, not again. You're not that dog anymore." He looked up at me, and something inside him seemed to break. He didn't bark or whimper. He just crawled into my lap, one paw at a time, shivering, pressing his soaked body against my chest as if trying to disappear into me. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tight. "I should have known," I whispered. "You weren't running away. You were running back to make sure it wasn't still waiting for you." He needed to see it, to return to the place where his pain had started. But this time, he didn't wait alone. This time, someone came for him. And maybe that's what he was truly testing. Not if the world could be trusted, but if we would show up when it mattered most. I carried him to the truck. He didn't look back. The house was silent when I brought him back. Emma was on the couch in her pajamas, clutching his duck toy so tightly her knuckles were white. Her parents stood on either side of her, their eyes red, watching in silence. The moment I opened the door, she dropped the toy and ran. "Toby." Her voice cut through the quiet like sunlight through fog. He perked up in my arms, his ears twitching. I set him on the floor, and he ran to her, not limped, not walked, but ran straight into her arms. She wrapped her arms around his neck and sobbed into his fur. He licked her face, whining for the first time in weeks, short, breathy cries that sounded more of relief than of fear. I stood in the doorway, dripping wet, watching them collapse onto the rug together. A girl and a dog, two broken things stitched back into place. Her mother gently touched my arm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for bringing him back." "He came back on his own," I said. "I just helped him finish the journey." Later that night, Emma brought the suitcase out from its corner again. But this time she didn't place it beside him. She opened it. Inside, she laid a drawing she had made of her and Toby sitting under a large tree with a bright sun overhead. Then she zipped the suitcase shut. And Toby, who had been watching her the entire time, stood up, walked over, and lay down beside it, not out of fear, but as if to say, "It's closed now. It's over." That was the last night he ever touched it. A week later, the family officially completed the adoption. Toby was now a registered emotional support dog, and Emma had started speaking in full sentences again, slowly and carefully, but consistently. At her therapist's office, she said something that made the room fall silent. "I talked because he stayed, and because someone stayed for him." Toby didn't need saving anymore. Now, he was the one doing the saving. And for the first time since I met him, he could finally rest. Not beside a suitcase, not on cold tiles, not on the side of a highway, but in a place where the one thing he had always wanted had finally come true. A place where someone stayed. Sometimes, the ones who are left behind are the ones who teach us the true meaning of love. Toby was more than a rescue. He was more than a victim of someone's cruelty. He was proof that even after the deepest betrayals, a soul can still choose to trust again. He waited on the side of that road, blindfolded and alone, not because he was unaware of his abandonment, but because he still held onto the belief that someone might return. And in a way, someone did. Emma, her family, and all of us who refused to look away. This small dog's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation highlights the critical importance of nonprofit rescue organizations. Caring for a rescued animal involves more than just affection. It requires responsibility and dedicated care. Toby's story is a powerful reminder of this. It stands as a testament for every dog waiting in silence, because the ones we save so often end up saving us in return.